Hi class, today we're going to be talking about chapter 1, the earliest people. In this video we're going to be talking about 5 different things. The first thing we're going to do is review, talk about the beginning of civilization, the Sumerians, the flood, and then what the Bible has to say about all of this. And so first we're going to start with review. Okay, so in chapter 1 you learned about nomads, and that a nomad is a person who wanders or roams around. They gather food from the land around them, and then when that food runs out, they continue following the herd or whatever food source. They lived in tents and caves, and we know this because of cave paintings. As you can see, the one I put up right here, which is from France. Okay, so then the nomads settled in the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent was an area that was full of rich grass, wild barley, and wild wheat, and it was between the Tigris and Euphrates River, which I'm going to show you right here. So here is the Tigris River, and here is the Euphrates, and this whole green area is the Fertile Crescent. And so if you could just follow this flow chart with me. So again, the nomads wandered in search for food. They settled in the Fertile Crescent, and then they learned how to become farmers. Soon the farmers began building houses because they didn't have to wander anymore because they had their food right there. These farmers then began building their houses really close together because they realized, hey, we can help each other, we can protect each other. It's just better to be in community. They also tamed animals, and this was the beginning of the first villages. Soon these villages became wealthier, and they built stone walls to protect their wealth from people groups outside, and these were the first cities. Okay, so the beginning of civilization. So all of this that we just studied, from nomads becoming farmers to then the cities, is called the Agricultural Revolution. The Agricultural Revolution created a permanent residence for people, and when people can stay in one place and make food, this creates a surplus of food. So before, every single person had to search for food and eat that food. Now you can have specific people making food because you can make a lot more food. And so as this creates a surplus, it allowed people to work for something other than food, whether it was in religious tasks such as being a priest or in a trade such as being a metalsmith. And this started organizing society. So organized society began developing. This was the beginning of the development of culture, and the agricultural revolution led to the beginning of civilization. So civilization is defined by these characteristics. So cultural and technological development. Civilization typically or always has a written language. They keep written records of things. People specialize in skills, like I just talked about. Because there is a surplus of food, you can specialize in certain skills. Like me, I don't have to be a farmer, I can be a teacher instead. People had different occupations. This created social classes, complex government system, and a culture typically had religious practices where people followed the same or variations of the same religion. And by the way, this picture is the site of Uruk, which is in the Fertile Crescent. So who were these people? Who were these people that were nomads, became farmers, and built these first cities in the Fertile Crescent? So they were the Sumerians, and they lived in Sumer, which is right here. And we know this because in the early 1900s in modern day Iraq, which is where Sumer is, the Sumerian king list was discovered. This is possibly the oldest historical record that we have. And so my question to you is, what can a king list tell you about the Sumerians? We talked about in our previous video how history is defined by having written records, whereas prehistory is a time when we don't have written records. And so when we have history, we have a story beginning to emerge. And so a better question might be, what is having this king list tell you about the Sumerians, and what story begins to emerge by seeing this king list? So in the history of the ancient world, Susan Wise Bauer says, as the Sumerians planted crops around their villages, life became so complicated that they needed a king to help them sort out their difficulties. Enter Alulim, king of Eridu, in the beginning of civilization. So what do you think became so complicated that the Sumerians needed a king? Obviously, if you're digging around and you find a king list, you have to wonder, okay, why did these people decide they needed a king, or want a king? What caused them? What situations led to a city deciding, hey, we need this king? So some of the reasons are pretty straightforward and pretty basic. Typically, you need a king to make sure that no one takes too much food or water. Okay, survival is at stake here. You want to make sure that everyone gets what they need. A king was needed to make sure that farmers cooperated in constructing canals and reservoirs. Now, if any of you have cooperated with friends or families to complete any task, whether it's a group project or maybe some chores at home, you know that because we're humans, we argue, we fight, we miscommunicate, we blame others, all sorts of things happen. And so it's really helpful when you have an authority figure, whether it's a teacher or a parent, say, hey, do it this way, or hey, you need a timeout, or you need to calm down, or here are the rules, you're not following the rules, whatever it is to help sort out these situations. Another reason that they needed a king was to make sure that the farmers sold to the non-farmers. Again, you have a surplus of food, these other people over here are doing different things, you got to make sure these people get food too. Also, as the villages grew into cities, this created a lot of problems. When you have growth, when you have more people, there's just going to be more issues to sort out, and so a king was needed to make sure everyone survived. So again, someone needed to make sure that these things were enforced, and a king was there to just make sure that everyone got what they needed and everyone cooperated and that people survived. So who was this first king? So on the Sumerian king list, the first king is, his name is Alulim, and it says that his kingship descended from heaven. So we can already see a story emerging here that the Sumerians saw kingship as a good thing. They saw their king as someone who was sent down from the gods to help them. He ruled Eridu, which according to the Sumerians was their first city as well as home to the gods. So it says that Alulim reigned 28,000 years, and then the king who followed him, Alagar, ruled 36,000 years. So you can see that this is kind of like, is this myth? Is this real? But the first 8 kings on the king list all reigned for thousands and thousands of years. And then it says catastrophe struck. It says the flood happened. The length of reign in kings changed after this, but before the flood, it says these 8 kings reigned for many, many, many years. So just a word on the flood. So again, in the history of the ancient world, Susan Wise Bauer makes this incredible statement, and I just love this. She says, the history of the earth has been punctuated by great catastrophes which apparently wiped out entire categories of life forms, but only one echoes down in the words and stories of a dozen different races. At some point during the living storytelling memory of the human race, water threatened man's fragile hold on the earth. The historian cannot ignore the Great Flood. It is the closest thing to a universal story that the human race possesses. So again, in a dozen different cultures, we have these flood stories. In Sumer, we have Enlil and Ea. We have the Babylonian poem of Atrahasis. We have the Genesis account of the flood. We have stories from China, India, the Mayan civilization from Peru, and we don't have time in this video to go through all of these, but I encourage you to look them up. I will link some in the description below, but please read them. They are so fun, so incredible, and some of them bear a remarkable resemblance to the Genesis story. So obviously you can see and conclude that the Genesis account of the flood is verified by all these cultures, and that it was so catastrophic that that people just continued to talk about it and talk about it, and we have all of these myths surrounding the flood. Okay, so what does the Bible have to say about all of this? So we talked about the agricultural revolution, the beginning of civilization, the Sumerians. Where does this all fit within the timeline of the Bible, specifically Genesis? I'm going to read some verses from Genesis to you. So in Genesis 4, it says, "Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground." Genesis 4. So already we can see Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve's sons. So first man and woman, their kids, keeper of sheep and worker of the ground. So you can already see taming animals, farming the ground from the get-go, pre-flood. Genesis 4 says, "Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he named the city after the name of his son Enoch." So again, we already have a city right in Genesis chapter 4. In Genesis 4:20, it says, "Ada bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock." Again, a reference to tamed animals. Post-flood, Genesis 9, "The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These three were the sons of Noah," sorry for the typo, "and from these the people of the whole earth dispersed." So we have, after the flood, we have his three sons, and they're resettling the earth in a sense. In Genesis 9:20, it says, "Noah began to be a man of the soil." So again, a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. So again, we are looking at the agricultural revolution, beginning of civilization, but we can see from the Genesis account that there was stuff happening before the flood. So what does all of this mean? As far as we know, before the flood, we had cities farming tame animals. Post-flood, possibly, the Sumerians were the first people group to start over, in a sense, in city building, in culture building, and all of this. So the Sumerians are the earliest traceable civilization to us. Before this, we don't have huge cities we can excavate. We don't have written records. And so this is why the Sumerians are considered the people who began civilization. We know that Abraham left the region, that is the Fertile Crescent, that is Sumer. So possibly he, possibly Noah, and Shem Shem is believed to have settled, one of Noah's sons settled in this region. And Abraham leaves this region to go to the land of Israel, which we will discuss later on. But as far as we're concerned, as far as our study of history, when we are looking at the Sumerians, this is why we attribute the beginning of civilization to them, because it's the first traceable civilization. So that is all I have for you today. I hope you have had a great time, and I will see you next time.